say a massive thank you to everyone who has liked so far, everyone who has subscribed. Please keep on coming in. Still waiting on some comments and feedback from you guys. But I'm hoping that you are all enjoying the content so far. So, today's case, I'm hoping is one that you guys probably haven't heard of, mainly because what we're going to discuss today, it wasn't actually, the information about the case wasn't actually brought out into the English press. It was actually only reported in the country where it happened. So obviously, you might hear of some cases in other countries, but 9 times out of 10 they usually go unreported in UK news. But obviously, I did, as I've already discussed, I did decide I was going to focus on some cases that revolve around members of my community, so obviously the LGBT. So today we are going to be discussing the case of Yap Weng. So he was born in 1983, and he was born in a city called Ipoh, which is the capital city of Malaysia. So Yap was the oldest of 3 children. He had a younger brother and a younger sister. And there's not really a wonderful lot of information about his backstory. What I do know is, and what I have found out, is that his father seemed to have abandoned the family when Yap was 8 years old, and he actually relocated to New Zealand. And this just obviously left the family in dire straits. His mum, she really struggled financially, and obviously we all know it's not that easy looking after children if you're not from a privileged background. It's not easy. So around the age of 12, so we're jumping up ahead a little bit here, but like I said, obviously there isn't really a lot of information. But at the age of 12, he claims that he was sexually abused by his male maths teacher, where the teacher would engage in oral and anal sex with Yap. And this carried on for about 9 months until the point that Yap had left school. This sort of abuse carried on until Yap had finally moved on to higher education. And years later, Yap believed that this abusive relationship stemmed from the lack of parental control that he had, or the lack of parental love that he had from his father. And obviously, you could sort of see it as he was looking for a father figure, and obviously the adult in that relationship had more malevolent sort of intentions than what Yap was looking for. So after leaving his school, Yap went on to train as a quality assurance engineer. I'm not really 100% sure what one of those entails, I'm not going to lie. If anyone does know, then obviously please feel free to comment and let me know. He then went to work at ASM Technology in Singapore. So obviously he then relocated from his home country of Malaysia to move to Singapore for this amazing opportunity for this new job. He began working there in 2009. And at work he went by the name of Travis, and obviously I know it's a lot of common practice for Filipino, Thai, Singaporean, Malaysian, they go by another name just so it's sort of easier for people that are not native to their country. It's easier to pronounce their name. Um, so yeah, he was going by the name of Travis, and he was described as quiet and not really showing any signs of perversions, any sexual perversions. Um, so I'm just gonna pause there for a moment, and obviously, he's not really going to be that blasé about his perversions or anything that he's into. I mean, obviously, you know, as long as it's between two consenting adults, no one really cares. But he's not going to really, you know, be that forthcoming about being the predator that he is. Um, because obviously, rightly so, society isn't going to accept someone like that in the workplace, or so on and so forth. Like, he's not going to get much further in life if he's openly willing to admit to what he actually is. So you know and obviously if he's been described as quiet, the last thing he's going to be doing is blagging about any sort of sex life that he's into. So Yap would use the internet to scout for boys who went to local schools within the radius of his apartment that he was renting, and this was in Yishan, which is obviously a city in Singapore. And he claimed to be 18 years old and a Polytech student, and he would use the name Wei, and he would tell his victims that he was from Indonesia. But that one, I can't really give any insight onto that, like, why he would feel the need to say that he was from another country. If anyone can sort of enlighten me onto the reason of why he would say he was from Indonesia but living in Singapore when he was in fact Malaysian, if there's any sort of conflict going on with them countries, feel free to fill me in. Sorry. So, with the boys who accepted him, Yap would present himself as a sort of older brother figure, and or a mentor of trust, really. And obviously, that is just abuse perpetrator 101. This the first thing they're going to do is try and build up a rapport that they're a caring sort of older figure to their victims. And he would so he would be chatting for several weeks or months, and they would start discussing things like their hobbies, any films that they were into, any sports. And it was during these conversations that Yap would introduce the subject of sex. He would then set up meetings with the promise of buying them gifts, which is a very common practice with abusers and paedophiles, all over the world, that they're gonna obviously want to shower their victims or would-be victims with gifts or whatever to sort of build that trust, if so to speak. So he obviously promised these gifts, or he would talk to them about showing them bodybuilding tips and things like that. And kind of looking at Yap, like the pictures that I have seen of him, he's definitely 100% not a bodybuilder, let me tell you that much. I've met a couple of bodybuilders in my time, and let me tell you, they are not 5'2" slim men. So then he would go on to take his victims to either his flat, or to other cities, like Woodlands, Hougang, Alginid, Changi, a chalet in downtown East, which is an entertainment hub in Pasir Ris, and Geelong. So obviously these are all cities in Singapore. I do apologise for my pronunciation. If I am butchering those, please correct me. Or he would just obviously take them to public toilets, which, to be honest, I couldn't think of anything really worse. To be honest, like if public toilets in Singapore are anything like public toilets in the UK, uh, no, not for me. So at these locations, Yap would convince the boys to allow him to perform oral and anal sex upon them. And this would always be without a condom, so no protection. And even if the boys were refusing, saying that they weren't gay or they cried, Yap would obviously just continue on with his assaults. So all of this happened to over 30 victims. The only one that Yap didn't actually assault was a 12-year-old boy, and there isn't any sort of reason why that didn't happen. Yap himself hasn't said. I couldn't find any more information about it. I do want to point out also that the identities of these boys, because obviously they were so young, no names have been mentioned in the courts, and obviously that's a way of protecting their identities. So obviously, unless they're ready to come forward and say that this happened to me, there is no information out there. I mean, obviously in courts they'll be referred to as child A, child B, and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously that's going by UK courts. Singapore and countries like that may refer to them as something different, but overall, yeah, it would be that kind of thing. So Yap would then use his phone to record his abuse, and when the boys would obviously realise this, they would ask him to delete the footage, and he said he would, but obviously he wasn't. He was actually saving the footage onto his laptop, and by the time police had arrested him, they found 2,218 videos on Yap's laptop, and these videos were all categorized. So they were categorized by the victim's age, what location they had met at, and the year that Yap had met them. So on the 23-page chart sheet filed in relation to the charge against Yap, 7 of these involved 11-year-old boys, 13 with 12-year-olds, 32 of those were with 13-year-olds, 20 with 14-year-olds, and 4 of these were with 15-year-olds. So in total, 51 charges related to penetration of under 14s, and 24 charges of penetration of under 16s, and 1 charge of Yap asking a 12-year-old boy to film himself having sex and then obviously send it to Yap. This was the same boy that he never had sex with, so obviously what we just discussed a minute ago. So, only a few of these crimes were made knowledge in certain articles. Specifically on the 4th of February 2010, Yap met up with a 13-year-old in a swimming pool cubicle, where he was told to remove his uniform, where Yap sodomized him and filmed this. And then a month later, Yap took a 15-year-old to a hotel room where Yap tried to kiss him, and despite the 15-year-old's protests, Yap had performed oral sex upon him. On the 25th of September 2011, a 14-year-old boy was told to perform oral sex in a toilet cubicle in Tampine Stadium. And on an unspecified date, involved another boy who Yap befriended on Facebook. And this was a few months before, which led to their meeting in a shopping mall. And this is where they were playing video games, and Yap took him something to eat, and then eventually took him back to the apartment where Yap was, which Yap was renting. Sorry. So he led this young boy to his bedroom and allowed the boy to watch some cartoons upon his laptop. And all this happened while Yap's landlord was actually sitting in the living room, so possibly right next door to the bedroom. That one sort of beggars belief, to be honest, that this could have been the chance for him to get caught if the landlord thought it was something to be suspicious about. Yap then removed the boy's clothes and assaulted him, and he promised to never do it again. But he then went on to meet the boy several more times throughout the year. And after watching films or eating, Yap would repeat his assaults. And while grooming his victims in Singapore, Yap had also extended his search history into his home country of Malaysia. And during his yearly visits, he would go on to assault another 14 boys while in Malaysia. And all of these boys were under 16. And these offences were brought to light during his arrest. But Singapore police couldn't actually charge him with these because obviously these offences hadn't happened in Singapore. They had happened in another country, which, if I'm honest, I would have charged him with the offences in Singapore and then extradited him back to Malaysia to face these other 14 charges. But I don't work for the police. Maybe it's not how things work, but in an ideal world, that's how they would work. So obviously, even though they couldn't find any evidence or couldn't charge him, about these offences, Yap had even recorded all 14 of these assaults as well. So the evidence was there for them to do something. I mean, obviously to hand it into Malaysian police. I'm not really sure why that never happened, and he faced extra 14 charges, but there we go. So in June 2012, his offences were first discovered when the sister of his 11-year-old victim checked her younger brother's phone and found messages between him and Yap. And she took this to the police on the 7th of September 2012. So after receiving a report from another... Sorry, I made a mistake there. So her and her brother took the footage to the police, or the messages, and then on the 7th of September, so a second person came forward. And they received another report from a victim, and Yap was finally arrested, and he went on to confess to only having sex with 3 boys. I mean, you might as well just go the whole hog, mate. Just 3. It ain't true. Oh, I can't even think. what goes through these people's brains. Like, they think that, you know, oh, if I just confess to a small fraction of it, maybe it'll help me get a more lenient sentence. It's because you know that your time is up, right? So you might as well just go the whole hog and admit to what you've done, and just hope that an early admission goes in your favour, rather than trying to conceal the whole truth and only giving half truths. So this was then when the police found the 2,218 videos on Yap's laptop, that they realised that obviously they had a Billy bullshit on their case. So on the 8th of September, he was charged with 76 counts and he was held on remand. And it was then reported his arrest had put his family back into hard times. So his sister had to leave her course at university to go try and find a job to feed her family. And his brother ended up having to leave his job to care for their mother, who I believe was seriously ill at the time, or possibly dying. I don't know, but all I know is that, yeah, his brother had to leave his job to care for her. The family would then travel weekly to Singapore, and which is a journey that takes about 6 hours. So obviously, which can't have been easy on his poor mother. You know, she not feeling that great and under full-time care by her other son. She's still having to go on a 6-hour journey to go visit this thing. I don't know what word I can use without being demonetized on YouTube, but I know we're not allowed to say the NONCE word, which anyone can point out the reason why, then that'd be really greatly appreciated. So on the 16th of January 2015, so this is like way over 2 years after Yap had been arrested the first time, he was brought to trial at the High Court of Singapore, and he stood before Judge Wu B. Lee. And at the start of his trial, he pled guilty to 12 counts of penetration to a child, and he agreed to have 64 other charges to be taken into consideration during his sentencing. Barrett Saluja, so he was a psychiatrist for the Institute of Mental Health. So he went to court to read a report that Yap was suffering from hebephilia. So for those of you who are not familiar, hebephilia, that is a sexual attraction, very akin to paedophilia. Hebephilia is more for pubescent children, so between the ages of 11 to 15, whereas paedophilia is more akin to children under the age of 11, so prepubescent. So he also testified that Yap was at high risk of reoffending, which is, you know, no shit, Sherlock. Like, we all know that you don't have to be a detective to realise that this man is dangerous. Given half the chance on the internet, what's the first thing he's going to do? Because these people just can't help themselves. You know, it's been proven time and time again. So, Tommy Tan, he was the defence psychiatrist, and he agreed with this and stated that Yap also showed signs of depression, but that he wasn't suicidal, but long-term imprisonment could increase suicide risk. So I just want to point out, obviously, probably some of you are probably thinking, well, you know, let him die, it's where he belongs. It's not really a case of him being protected, you know, in a certain way. He kind of has to be, but it's more of the case of if a prisoner is on suicide watch and they do actually end up killing themselves, It's more of a case of it actually bringing a bad name on the prison. Like, that's what the prison guards don't really want. For a past couple of days, I've been watching a couple of videos on here with some ex-convicts or ex-prisoners, whatever you want to call them. Been actually really interesting videos. If Fran or anyone like comes across this video, then hi. um, but yeah, so from my understanding, obviously the officers, they don't want to protect these people. What they're trying to protect is the prison's reputation. So, in a second report, Dr. Tan said it was hard to say if he could confidently say that if Yap had a paedophilic disorder, but that his hunting of the victims showed a deviant pattern of sexual behaviour. And Deputy Public Prosecutor David Koo, so he argued that Yap's offences showed a high degree of premeditation, and through his exploitation of the internet, he clearly targeted the most vulnerable group of people who he carried out sexual acts unprotected. So not only had Yap breached his trust, he also caused a significant amount of harm to his victims, and he had morally corrupted them. For those factors and the difficulties of detecting crimes against children, Koo asked for the most severe punishment to be handed down to Yap. The prosecution stated that caning was only used if there was an act of violence involved around sex crimes. They said Yap's penetration constituted act violence, and that these acts were repulsive to any human conscience. They said caning was necessary. On the other hand, Yap's lawyer asked for a sentence of no more than 30 years, and he strongly objected to the use of the cane, conceding that if it was to be used, it should only be used 24 times. Koo asked for consideration of Yap's time on remand, where Yap claimed that he wanted to reform and that his strong family ties could help him rehabilitate. He said that Yap was a first-time offender and that with his credentials, he could contribute to society as a useful and productive individual. Just want to point out, obviously, there is no place in society for people like this. People like Yap, they do not change. It's a mental disorder that they've got in their head. Yes, they can't really help it. It's not really their fault. Just want to point that out. But the attraction is always going to be there. And if the attraction's there, the higher chance that, he's going to re-offend. Obviously, there are people known as virtuous paedophiles. So, obviously, I'm just on a little side note. So, a virtuous paedophile is someone who's aware that they have these tendencies, but they don't act upon them. They actually want to go out and seek help for these tendencies, but it's clear from his offending, the Yap Weng, he is not a virtuous paedophile in any shape or form. So, Yap, in his mitigation letter for the courts, pleaded to the courts to be lenient because he actually felt ashamed and resentful. You should be ashamed. There is no resentment, Yap. The only thing you resent is getting caught. Because if you hadn't been caught, your number of victims could have been in the hundreds. He also felt sorry for his family, so obviously as he should. Um, and he remained supportive. No, they sorry had remained supportive despite their shock and disgust. And he also made an apology to all his victims. Again, I don't buy that. I don't buy when perpetrators apologise to their victims' families. Like I said, the only person you are truly feeling sorry for in that moment is yourself. And in your head, if you're thinking, if I show a little bit of resentment, maybe the judge will go more lenient on me. It's not going to work like that. So Yap went on to blame his own rapes and his fear of approaching girls after being rejected in school as factors of him being the person that he is. Again, going back, no, that is nothing to do with the person that you are. I mean, in my own personal life, I have been knocked down time and time and time again by people that I, out of my way said I'm attracted to. Been let down more times than a lilo, if I'm honest. It doesn't make me a sexual deviant, a sexual predator. I think for many well-adjusted humans, it doesn't make that have gone through similar. We're all facing rejection at one point or another in our lives. It doesn't make us go out and commit these type of heinous acts. On the 20th of March 2015, Yap was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment and he had 24 strokes of the cane. The sentence was backdated to the 8th of September 2012. So this was the start day of Yap's remand. So for those of you who are not familiar, the cane. So obviously some countries have their own form of capital punishment. So obviously America, if you're on death row, that's their capital punishment. You'll be either injected, I think gas may be used. I don't know if the electric chair is still used. If you can point that out, then that'd be great. Firing squad, I know that one is in America as well, I believe. And then obviously there are some really, in my opinion, really barbaric acts carried out for capital punishment. So, like in many Middle Eastern countries, stoning is one that's used, and which is absolutely barbaric, in my opinion. Like, there's really no need for that kind of act to be performed, no matter what they've done. Like, I think that's just a bit step too far, if I'm honest. So, Justice Woo-Bee Lee said Yap's offences were particularly heinous, and he went on to say that other than deterrent, the punishment handed out should also reflect the principle of retribution and the degree of emotional and physical physical harm he caused to his victims. I don't believe that you are genuinely remorseful. As from the start, you try to downplay the magnitude of your crimes, which are the worst case of sexual offences against pubescent males. Your guilty plea wasn't from remorse, but from realising your goose was truly cooked. So it seems like myself and maybe many of you have the exact same opinion of Yap that the judge actually has. He also stated other aggravating circumstances where Yap's high premeditation displayed by Yap using the internet to lure and befriend his victims, earning their trust and breaching it while satisfying his deviant sexual urges. He rejected the argument that Yap was suicidal, as his tendencies were phrased in tentative terms and will have to be managed by prison authorities. which is obviously really common practice. So the filming of the acts also gave risk of being shared out to third parties and then being circulated. So obviously sharing that on the deep dark web. So for just a little context, what with the internet, so it's only 5% of what we see is the actual internet, like anything good. There's 5%, which is the dark web, and I think there's about 95% of it is actually the deep dark web. So huge differences right there for, you know, anything to go on, and anything does go on the deep dark web. Oh my god, that's some of the things that I've heard. How these things, how people believe that they're going to go out, but obviously the police can't police everything that goes on the web, but I think they try their damned hardest, but obviously there's always some sick individual who thinks they're one step ahead. So there's a strong public interest to deter any potential criminals from misusing the internet and gain access to the victims. So for those reasons, along with the higher possibility of reoffending, I sentence you to a lengthy term to separate you from society as long as possible. So upon hearing the sentence, Yap reportedly teared up, as did his family, and then they were given time to spend with him before him being taken to prison. They then declined to give any interviews, and so far there have been no appeals made on Yap's sentence. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, is that Yap knows he's guilty. Like, there's no doubt in it. He knows what he did, and he knows that he hasn't got a chance in hell of getting the successful appeal. Sorry. So currently Yap is still serving his sentence, and providing he has good behaviour while he's inside, he could only end up actually serving 2/3 of his sentence. So that's around 20 years of his sentence. So he's currently only served 8 years so far. His possible early release date is set at the 8th of September 2032. So at this point, Yap, he will actually be 49 years old. If I'm honest, he should have been given a lot longer sentence. I believe at 49, he could still potentially be a danger to society. I don't think after the possibility of 20 years, I don't think that he's going to have changed that much, if I'm honest. But that's just my personal opinion. Hopefully, Singapore jails work with him to realise his level of offending. But if I'm honest, I highly doubt it. So, despite the seriousness of his case, Yap has only made nationwide news in Singapore. So this is obviously what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. So, like I said, obviously some of you may not be aware of this case. I certainly wasn't until recently, when I was researching different cases that I could be talking about. I am kind of glad that I did find out about this one, because while I was doing my research, you know, it is right, there is really not a wonderful lot of information out there in the UK. I could find what I could find. There were a few English newspapers that did report it, but they're very small articles. Most of the information I've got, I've had to translate from Singaporean newspapers, which did, obviously, as you can understand, it did take a while to do that. So Yap's case has also borne resemblance to other infamous cases in Singapore. This is such as a 37-year-old man from Winnipeg. I believe that's in Canada. If anyone wants to reaffirm that, that'd be great. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in Ontario, Canada. So he preyed on a young girl from Singapore, and she then ended up flying out to Winnipeg to visit him. He then repeatedly raped her and took photos of the assaults. There was no other information on that case. If anyone from Winnipeg knows of it, who comes across, then please just leave a comment on any update about that case if you are familiar with it. There was also a 38-year-old Sofian Hamza, and he contacted 15 boys under the age of 18, and he performed oral sex on them, and he was sentenced to 15 years in 2018 after pleading guilty to 8 out of 83 charges held against him. And in the UK, this one was a really big story, and the reason that I'm repeating it today, it was because it actually did recall some of Yap's crimes in contrast. So it was actually Mark Bridger. So for those of you who are not aware, Mark was a Welshman. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not gonna pronounce the town name because I can't pronounce Welsh words because it just seems like a jumble of letters. I believe we come with P, but like I said, I'm not going to pronounce it. So Mark is actually serving a whole life tariff, which means that he will never be up for release. He is serving the tariff for the abduction, murder and rape of 5-year-old April Jones. So I believe this happened in 2015 as well. I think it was 2015 anyway. I definitely remember when this happened. I remember hearing about it and following it. It's just the actual year has sort of escaped my mind at the moment. But like I said, there was a lot of similarities between the Mark Bridger case and the one surrounding Yap. And this is just the only reason why I am talking about, very briefly, talking about the Mark Bridger case. So that brings us to the end of this video. So I just want to thank you again for taking your time out to view. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like, leave a subscribe, press your notification button, and I will be releasing my videos weekly, but there's not like a set day of when they come out. So obviously with the notification bell, that will let you know when my next video comes out. So yeah, massive thank you to you guys, and I will see you